They say the universe is indifferent, a vast cold expanse of mathematical certainties and violent, random beauty. For most of my 35 years, I've found comfort in that. There's a profound peace in knowing that the spin of a neutron star doesn't care about your mortgage or your broken heart. But on that Tuesday, holding a thick cream-colored envelope with the European Southern Observatory logo embossed in navy blue, the universe felt profoundly, terrifyingly personal. The lab was my sanctuary, a place of controlled variables. The gentle hum of the servers processing petabytes of cosmic data was my favorite symphony. The air, chilled to a precise 68 degrees Fahrenheit, always smelled faintly of ozone and hot electronics. Here, I was, Dr. Aris Thorne, a woman who charted the life cycle of galaxies. I was not the reliable older sister, the sensible one. Here, I was a discoverer. And this letter, this single piece of paper, was the proof, my proving ground. My hands were perfectly steady as I slit the envelope. My heart, however, was a supernova, a one-year research residency, the Very Large Telescope, the Atacama Desert, Chile. The clearest skies on planet Earth, a place so close to the heavens it felt like you could reach out and shatter a nebula with your fingertips. It wasn't just a grant, it was the culmination of everything. Every late night, every sacrificed weekend, every time I chose a spectral analysis over a social life. This was my validation. I took a deep, sterile breath and dialed the one number I was conditioned to call with news of any magnitude. My mother answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar. "Aris, honey, how are you?" I explained it all. The grant, Chile, the research. I could almost feel the words shimmering as I said them, a constellation of triumph. There was a pause on the other end, just a fraction of a second too long. A tiny, almost imperceptible dip in the energy of the call. "Well, isn't that something?" she said. Her joy was a distant star. You could see its light, but you couldn't feel its heat. "Chile, you say? My goodness, that's far." Before I could respond, the gravitational pull of our family's true center of mass took hold. "Listen, honey, I'm glad you called. Things here have been difficult. It's Cora. She had her audition for the conservatory last week. It didn't go well." The familiar sensation washed over me, a cold front moving in. It wasn't anger or even resentment. Not anymore. It was something more worn, more tired. The simple acceptance of a physical law. For every action in my life, there was an equal and opposite Cora reaction. My success was a flicker. Her latest crisis was a roaring fire demanding all the oxygen in the room. I could already hear my father in the background, his voice a low rumble, asking if it was me. My mother continued, her voice dropping into the hushed conspiratorial tone reserved for discussing the fragile genius that was my 29-year-old sister. "She's taking it very hard, Aris. She's locked herself in her room. She's not playing, not a single note. Your father and I are at our wits' end." I looked at the letter in my hand, at the official words confirming the biggest moment of my professional life. It suddenly felt a little less real, a little less important. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mom. Is she talking to you at all?" I asked, my own script well rehearsed. I was the calm one, the problem solver. It was my role. "Barely," she sighed, and the weight of that sigh traveled 500 miles through the phone line. "We just thought, well, you've always been so good with her. Maybe you could come down for the weekend? Just being here might help." The request was so casual, so expected. I looked around my lab, at the screens displaying the elegant, silent dance of distant stars. My world was one of immense, beautiful, logical things that followed predictable paths. My family was a chaotic system, a three-body problem that defied every calculation. I knew I should be celebrating, calling my colleagues, drinking champagne that was far too expensive. Instead, I was being pulled back into an orbit I had spent my entire life trying to escape. "Of course, Mom," I heard myself say. "I'll be there on Friday." Have you ever wondered how silence can have a weight? I have. The silence of deep space is a weightless, clean thing, a perfect vacuum. But the silence in my parents' house that Friday afternoon was heavy, thick, and choking. It wasn't an absence of sound, it was a presence. A malevolent entity that had taken up residence in the familiar rooms of my childhood. It clung to the furniture and coated every surface in a fine, invisible film of dread. The first thing I saw was the piano. Cora's grand piano, a gleaming black Steinway that had always been the sun around which our family orbited, was closed. Not just closed, but sealed. The lid was down, the fallboard covering the keys was shut, and a thin, uniform layer of dust had settled over its polished surface. Dust. On Cora's piano. It was the physical manifestation of the silence, a gray shroud over the heart of our home. I ran a finger over the lid, leaving a dark streak in the grime. It felt like tracing a name on a tombstone. My mother appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, a ghost in her own house. She put a finger to her lips, her eyes wide with a familiar, practiced anxiety. "Aris, thank you for coming," she whispered, as if a normal tone of voice might shatter the fragile peace. "She's in her room. She might be sleeping." We didn't hug. The air was too thick for that. Instead, she led me to the living room, where we sat on floral couches that suddenly felt like pews. The silence was a constant pressure in my ears. "How bad is it?" I asked, keeping my own voice low. My mother wrung her hands, a gesture so common I could map its geometry from memory. "It's a deep depression," the doctor on the phone said. "That's his guess anyway. She hasn't played a note since the audition, Aries. Not one. She barely eats. A few bites of toast a day. She doesn't sleep at night, just paces. Then she collapses in the middle of the day. And she doesn't talk. At all. It's like she's just gone." Her voice cracked on the last word, and the sound was immediately swallowed by the oppressive quiet. I am a scientist. I solve problems by observing data, forming a hypothesis, and testing it. The data set was clear: loss of appetite, insomnia, withdrawal, cessation of primary activity. The hypothesis was simple: a severe depressive episode. The test was the next logical step: communication. After another hour of my mother's whispered circular fears, I went upstairs. The hallway felt longer than I remembered. Her door, white and impassive, was closed. It was a blank slate, offering no information. I knocked softly. "Cora? It's me, Aris. I came to see you." The only response was the sound of my own words being absorbed by the wood. I tried again. "Can I come in? We could just sit. We don't have to talk." Nothing. I could feel the sheer force of her silence radiating from the other side. It was a shield, a weapon, a declaration. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my scientific mind racing through variables and failing. Logic was useless here. Reason was a foreign language. I finally gave up and went back downstairs, the feeling of helplessness a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. I had mapped the gravitational lensing of dark matter and traced the origins of elements in the hearts of dying stars. I had solved equations that described the very beginning of time. But I was standing in my childhood home, completely and utterly powerless, defeated by a closed door and the crushing, heavy silence behind it. I looked over at the dusty piano, a black hole in the center of the room, absorbing all light and all hope. and for the first time my own bright future in Chile felt impossibly, terrifyingly far away, part of another galaxy entirely. What happens when a silent pressure becomes an unbearable force? It doesn't explode, it implodes. The crisis arrived not with a bang, but with a terrifying whimper. On the third day of my visit, my mother found Cora on her bedroom floor, curled into a fetal position, her eyes open but seeing nothing. She was lucid, but completely unresponsive, like a star that had collapsed in on itself, its light extinguished. The 911 call was a blur of my mother's frantic sobs and my own strangely calm, procedural instructions. I became a scientist in the face of chaos, observing symptoms: dehydration, exhaustion, catatonia. The paramedics were efficient, their questions sharp and impersonal, and for the first time in days, I felt a strange sense of relief. The problem was no longer a shapeless family ghost, it was a medical emergency, a thing with protocols. The hospital was a different kind of quiet. It was a sterile, beeping silence, punctuated by the soft squeak of rubber soles on linoleum. We sat in a small beige consultation room that smelled of antiseptic wipes. My father paced the length of the tiny space, his footsteps a frantic, caged rhythm. My mother just sat, twisting the strap of her purse into a knot. I watched them, feeling an odd sense of detachment, as if observing a foreign species in a controlled environment. I understood the data points, the fear, the anxiety, but the emotional calculus was beyond me. Then the door opened, and a man in a white coat, with a kind, tired face, introduced himself as Dr. Evans, the staff psychiatrist. He spoke in calm, measured tones, a stark contrast to the storm that had brought us there. He explained that Cora was stable, sedated, and safe. Then he gave the ghost a name. Your daughter is experiencing an acute depressive episode with significant elements of an anxiety disorder. The words landed in the sterile air with clinical precision. For me, it was data. A diagnosis was a framework, a starting point for a logical solution: therapy, medication, a treatment plan. My mind was already building the flowchart. But then Dr. Evans delivered the line that would change everything. Intensive therapy and a course of medication are essential. But what Cora needs most right now, more than anything, is an exceptionally stable, supportive, and above all, stress-free home environment. I watched my parents' faces as they processed this. It was like watching light bend as it enters a different medium. I heard a medical recommendation for a therapeutic setting. They heard something else entirely. My father stopped pacing. My mother's gaze, sharp and sudden, flickered from the doctor to me. In that single, fleeting glance, I saw it. I saw the gears turning. They weren't hearing about a path to recovery for their daughter. They were being handed a justification, a tool, a divine mandate. The doctor's clinical advice was being transmuted, right before my eyes, into the emotional and moral leverage they had been searching for. The word supportive hung in the air, and I could feel its meaning shifting, its gravity increasing, its trajectory aimed directly at me. The drive home was a vacuum. Cora would be kept for observation for a few days, maybe a week. We left her in the quiet, sterile care of the hospital and re-entered the thick, emotional silence of the car. My father gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "A psychiatrist," he muttered, the word itself an insult. "Her career. How is she supposed to get back on stage after this? They'll say she's unstable." My mother stared out the window. "He said she needs stability, Frank. No stress. He said that's the most important thing." Her voice was flat, but I could hear the underlying machinations. They weren't discussing how to heal Cora's mind. They were discussing how to salvage a project. The Project Cora that had been the singular focus of their lives for almost 30 years. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the passenger window, watching the familiar suburban houses of my hometown slide by. A diagnosis should have been an answer, a clarification. Instead, it felt like a verdict, a sentence. For a moment, I had seen a logical path forward, a series of steps to help my sister. But that path was already gone, obscured by my parents' unique interpretation of the doctor's words. I understood with a cold, sinking certainty that the official, medical weight of Cora's illness had just been placed on a scale. And on the other side of that scale was my entire future. The observatory, the desert, the stars. They all felt a million light years away. I knew a conversation was coming. A serious conversation. The diagnosis wasn't the end of the crisis. It was the beginning of the war. They came for me the evening after Cora was admitted. There was no formal announcement, but I felt it the way an animal senses a shift in barometric pressure before a storm. The house, already quiet, grew quieter still. My father turned off the television. My mother wiped down an already spotless kitchen counter. It was a ritualistic preparation for a tribunal. They didn't ask me to join them in the living room. They simply sat and waited, knowing I would come. The two of them on the floral couch, me in the armchair opposite. It was a configuration we hadn't used in years, the geometry of a formal intervention. A proving ground. My father began, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. He cleared his throat, a sound of manufactured gravity. Aris, you know your mother and I have always been proud of you. Immensely proud. Your focus, your brain. It's a gift. He looked at his hands, not at me. It was his classic opening gambit, the preamble of praise before the difficult verdict. But family is about more than just being proud of individual accomplishments. It's a fabric. When one thread weakens, the others have to pull tighter to keep it from unraveling. It's a duty we all share. His words were so generic, so rehearsed, they were practically meaningless, a smokescreen of platitudes. My mother, ever the pragmatist, couldn't tolerate the slow burn. She reached out and placed a hand on my father's knee, a signal for him to stop. She looked directly at me, her eyes clear and filled with a terrifying, absolute conviction. Aris, honey, we know how much Chile means to you. We truly do. But Cora, she needs you. You heard the doctor. He said she needs stability, a supportive environment. Frank and I, we're too close to it. We're wound too tight. But you're the calm one, the steady one. She took a breath, and the air in the room seemed to thin. We are asking you to postpone your trip. Just for 1 year. Your presence here is the only thing that can truly heal her. The request didn't register as sound at first. It was a seismic wave that traveled up from the floor, through the chair, and into the base of my skull. Postpone. The word was a lie. A grant from the European Southern Observatory wasn't a dentist appointment you could reschedule. It was a comet with a precise orbital window. If you miss it, it's gone, lost to the darkness for a generation. My entire professional life, every star I had ever charted, had been leading to this single trajectory. And they were asking me to step out of the speeding vehicle, to stand on the side of the road and wave as it disappeared over the horizon. The shock was a physical thing, a high-frequency ringing in my ears that drowned out the ticking of the mantel clock. I can't, I finally managed to say, the words feeling foreign and clumsy in my own mouth. I tried to make them understand, to translate the magnitude of their request from my world into theirs. You don't postpone something like this. It's not a job offer. It's a singular opportunity. There's a list of alternates from around the globe. If I decline or delay, they simply move to the next name. That telescope time is booked years in advance. This is it. There is no other chance. I was speaking calmly, trying to lay out the cold, hard facts of the situation, hoping logic could somehow penetrate the dense fog of their emotional crisis. I might as well have been describing the physics of a black hole. They saw only the event horizon, not the immutable laws that governed it. It was as if I had spoken in a dead language. My logical, evidence-based argument that this opportunity was a fixed point in time, a celestial event that would not repeat, had no meaning here. The tribunal wasn't interested in evidence, it was interested in a confession. My father's expression hardened, the manufactured pride evaporating to reveal the bedrock of disappointment beneath. My mother's eyes, which a moment ago held a plea, now glinted with the sharp edge of a blade. The air, already thin, was sucked from the room. The debate was over. The sentencing was about to begin. But I wasn't done. I was a scientist, and when one approach failed, you recalibrated and tried another. I leaned forward, forcing a calm I did not feel into my voice. Okay, let's set my trip aside for a second. Let's focus on the actual problem. Getting Cora the best possible care. I've already done some research. We can hire a round-the-clock psychiatric nurse, someone trained for this. I can pay for it. We can get her an appointment with the top specialist in performance-related mental health in Boston. We can even look at private residential clinics. There are options. Real, professional solutions. I laid my proposals out on the coffee table between us, like a set of blueprints for a stable structure. My mother made a sound, a short, sharp gasp of outrage, as if I had just proposed selling the family home. A nurse? A stranger in our house, watching her like a hawk? Is that what you think she is, Aris? A problem to be managed by a professional? Her voice rose, shearing through the quiet. She needs her sister. She doesn't need a stranger to hand her a pill. She needs family to sit with her, to talk to her, to just be there. Do you think you can just write a check and have your responsibility outsourced? Is that how you see us? It was a masterful pivot. My practical solutions were twisted into an indictment of my character, portrayed as a cold, transactional attempt to buy my freedom. That was when my father stood up, the movement slow and deliberate. He walked to the unlit fireplace, resting one hand on the mantelpiece, and turned to face me. He looked at me with a profound, weary sadness that was 1,000 times more potent than anger. Aris, listen to me. Your stars will still be there a year from now. They've been hanging in the sky for billions of years. They aren't going anywhere. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. But Cora has one life, one career. She has a single fleeting chance to get back on that stage. Your work is infinite and abstract. Her life is right here, right now. And it's breaking. Science can wait. Family can't. The finality of his statement was absolute. It was the most devastating argument I had ever heard, because it was built on a foundation of love, however twisted. In their universe, my life's work was a patient, timeless thing, a hobby of looking at cosmic dust. Cora's was a brilliant, fragile flame that needed every ounce of our family's oxygen to keep from being extinguished. They weren't just asking me to postpone a trip. They were asking me to acknowledge that my dream was inherently less valuable, less urgent, less real than my sister's. My logic was an insult. My solutions were a betrayal. My refusal was pure, unadulterated selfishness. And as they both stared at me, their faces a mixture of pain and accusation, I realized I was no longer on a proving ground. I was on a sacrificial altar. The argument with my parents left a residue in the air, an invisible, bitter dust that settled on every surface. They had presented their case, built on a foundation of love so warped it had become a cage. Logic had been dismissed as coldness. Reason had been reframed as selfishness. I was cornered, boxed in by their emotional absolutes. But they were only part of the equation. There was still one variable I hadn't isolated, one primary source I hadn't consulted directly. I had to talk to Cora. If I could just make her understand, person to person, sister to sister, without the distorting lens of our parents' panic, maybe there was still a chance. Her room was back in the house, not the hospital. She'd been discharged that afternoon into our suffocating care. I climbed the stairs, each step a conscious effort against the heavy gravity of that house. Her door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open gently, my heart a dull, rhythmic thud against my ribs. The room was dark, the curtains drawn against the late afternoon sun, casting everything in a deep, bruised twilight. The air was stale and thick with the scent of sleep and something else, something metallic and sharp, like shed tears. She was lying on her bed, on top of the covers, a single, still form in the gloom. Her back was to me, but I knew she wasn't asleep. She was staring at the floral wallpaper, as if trying to decipher a code in its repeating patterns. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress sinking slightly with my weight. She didn't move. "Cora?" I began, my voice a low murmur, careful not to break the fragile stillness. "I need to talk to you about Chile." I waited, but there was no response. I took a breath and tried to assemble the words, to build a bridge from my world to hers. "This isn't just a job for me. It's like your music. It's the only language that makes sense. For years, I've been looking at data, at faint signals from the edge of the universe. This grant, this telescope, it's a chance to finally hear the full symphony. It's a one-time thing, Cora. A chance that will never, ever come again. I need you to understand that." For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the house. Then, slowly, she rolled over to face me. Her face was pale and puffy, her charismatic energy collapsed into a gravitational point of pure misery. Her eyes were vacant, but as I watched, they filled with tears. They didn't fall in a rush. They welled up, slow and perfect, then spilled silently down her temples and into her hair. A quiet, cinematic grief. And then she spoke, her voice a raw whisper, a sound so fragile it threatened to break apart in the air. "So you're abandoning me?" she breathed, the words barely audible. "Everyone always leaves. I knew I was just a burden." It wasn't an accusation shouted in anger. It was a statement of fact delivered with the quiet, devastating finality of a death sentence. And it hit me with the force of a physical blow. This was not a debate. This was not a discussion. This was the deployment of a weapon so powerful, so precise, that all my defenses, my logic, my reason, my ambition, were instantly vaporized. It was a weapon forged in 35 years of shared history, honed by a lifetime of our family's toxic dynamics. It bypassed my brain and went straight for my soul, targeting the deeply embedded guilt of the responsible older sister. Her weakness was her strength, her fragility a perfect, unbreakable shield. And as I sat there, silenced and shattered, I understood the terrifying truth. You cannot reason with a black hole. You can only be pulled into its orbit. I retreated to my lab. It was the only place left where the laws of physics still applied. After Cora's quiet, devastating performance, the emotional gravity of my parents' house had become too dense to breathe. I needed the cold, clean vacuum of my work to think. The blinking lights of the server racks were a comfort, a silent testament to a universe that operated on predictable principles. But I couldn't focus. The equations on my screen blurred, the elegant dance of numbers and symbols dissolving into meaningless squiggles. My family's crisis was a rogue signal, a burst of chaotic noise that was drowning out the faint, orderly whispers of the cosmos. I felt adrift, my own trajectory thrown into chaos by an unforeseen gravitational pull. There was one person who might understand. Not the family drama, but the stakes. Dr. Ramirez. He was my mentor. A brilliant 60-something astrophysicist with a mind like a radio telescope, capable of detecting the faintest signals of truth in a universe of noise. He had been the one to champion my application for the ESO grant, the one who had written a letter of recommendation so glowing it practically created its own light. He deserved an explanation. I owed him that much. I scheduled a video call, my fingers feeling heavy and clumsy on the keyboard, as if I were typing out a confession. His face appeared on my monitor, framed by a bookshelf overflowing with texts on quantum mechanics and cosmology. He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Aris, there's my star charter. I trust you are preparing for the clearest skies on Earth?" His cheerful greeting was a punch to the gut. I tried to smile back, but I could feel the muscles in my face struggling. "Hi, Dr. Ramirez." "Yes, about that. Something has come up. A family issue." I kept it vague, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "A serious family illness. I'm not sure. I might need to delay my arrival." The lie was suffocating. I wasn't delaying. I was being erased. Dr. Ramirez's smile faded, replaced by a look of sharp, analytical concern. He was a man who spent his life looking for patterns, for the subtle deviations in light that signified a hidden truth. He was reading the hesitations in my voice, the flicker in my eyes, the way I wouldn't meet his gaze. He didn't press for details. He didn't need to. He simply observed the data. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze so intense it felt as though he were peering through a telescope, right into the collapsing nebula of my resolve. Then he spoke, his voice calm and precise, stripping away all the emotional noise and leaving only the core of the problem. "Aris," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "A talent like yours is not just a gift. It is a responsibility. You have a duty not just to yourself, but to the field of science, to the very pursuit of knowledge. It sounds to me as if your family is asking you to bury your talent in order to nurse another." He leaned closer to the camera, his eyes holding mine. "Think very carefully about whether that is a fair request. The world has a great many talented musicians. It has far fewer minds capable of understanding the fundamental architecture of the universe. The world needs your brain, Aris, perhaps just as much as your sister needs your care." His words were a lifeline. In a universe that had suddenly become chaotic and emotional, he had just handed me a fixed point of reference, a law, a responsibility not of guilt and obligation, but of purpose. He wasn't telling me to abandon my family. He was reminding me that I had another family, another duty, a duty to the very thing that made me who I am. He was giving my dream a weight, a value, a right to exist that my parents had denied. He saw my work not as a patient, abstract hobby, but as a vital, necessary pursuit. For the first time in days, I could feel the crushing gravitational pull of my family's crisis lessen its grip, just slightly. A single, distant star had just appeared in my personal darkness, offering a direction, a way out. Dr. Ramirez's words had recalibrated my internal compass. The conversation had provided a crucial external data point, a confirmation that my own ambitions were not selfish delusions, but valid, important coordinates on the map of my life. I spent the next 24 hours not in emotional turmoil, but in methodical research. I was a scientist again, tackling a complex problem with data and logic. I compiled a list of the top-rated private psychiatric facilities in New England, cross-referencing patient reviews with treatment methodologies. I made phone calls, inquiring about intake protocols and therapeutic specializations. I chose one, a beautiful, highly regarded clinic in the Berkshires, a place known for its compassionate, evidence-based approach. It wasn't a sterile hospital, it was a place of healing, a sanctuary. I calculated my finances. Draining my savings would be a significant blow, a hit that would take years to recover from, but I could cover the first month. It was a substantial, tangible commitment. It was not a dismissal of their problem. It was a concrete, powerful solution. This was my compromise, my grand unified theory that could, I hoped, reconcile the opposing forces in my family. I would provide Cora with the best professional care imaginable, ensuring her safety and recovery. I would fulfill my duty as a sister. And then I would go to Chile. I would fulfill my duty to myself. I rehearsed my presentation, anticipating their objections, preparing my counter-arguments. I was ready. I called a second tribunal. This time, I didn't wait to be summoned. I walked into the living room where they were sitting in a familiar, tense silence and stood before them, a folder in my hand. I didn't sit down. I needed the tactical advantage of height. I have a solution, I announced, my voice steady, professional. It's a compromise that ensures Cora gets the absolute best care and that I can still take the grant. I laid it all out for them. The clinic, its reputation, the serene environment, the team of specialists. I explained that I had already spoken with their admissions director. And then, I played my trump card. I'm going to pay for the first month myself. Out of my savings. This is my contribution. This is my help. I expected resistance. I expected arguments. What I got was a detonation. The explosion of raw, unrestrained fury was instantaneous and shocking in its intensity. My father shot to his feet, his face a mask of purple rage. "A clinic?" he roared, the word a vile epithet. "You want to ship your sister off to a nut house? Lock her away with strangers so you can wash your hands of her, so you can run off to your precious desert and play with your telescopes? Is that your solution? To have her committed?" His voice was shaking, his body trembling with a rage so profound it seemed to suck the very light from the room. My mother's reaction was quieter, but somehow more devastating. She didn't yell. She began to cry, her body racked with deep, agonizing sobs. She looked up at me, her face a mess of tears and betrayal. "How could you, Aris?" she whispered, her voice thick with anguish. "We asked you for your heart, and you offer us your money. You're trying to buy your freedom from us, from your own sister." The words were designed to pierce, to inflict maximum damage, and they did. The force of their combined fury was a physical blow, a concussive wave of indignation and wounded pride. They weren't just refusing my solution, they were repulsed by it. It was a moment of terrifying clarity, a white-hot flash of understanding that seared away all my remaining hope for a rational compromise. It was never about finding the best solution for Cora. It was, and had always been, about the price of my loyalty. They didn't want a check. They wanted a sacrifice. They needed me to offer up my dream on the family altar, and anything less, no matter how logical or generous, was an unforgivable betrayal. The battle of wills was over. A new, colder war had just begun. My departure date was a week away, a fixed point on the calendar that now felt like a deadline for a surrender I had no intention of making. The rejection of my proposal had changed the atmospheric pressure in the house. The thick, oppressive silence of the previous week was replaced by something far more sinister, a brittle, high-tension quiet, humming with unspoken threats. My parents moved around me with a rigid, wounded formality, our conversations reduced to curt, necessary exchanges about groceries and mail. I was no longer their daughter. I was a foreign dignitary with whom they'd had a catastrophic diplomatic failure. Cora remained a ghost in her room, a silent, powerful queen on their side of the chessboard. I ignored the emotional warfare and focused on logistics. My world had been reduced to a series of tasks: confirming my flight, arranging for the shipment of my books, transferring research protocols to my university's secure server. I began to pack, the simple act of folding clothes into a suitcase feeling like a revolutionary act, a quiet declaration of independence. My suitcases, open on the floor of my childhood bedroom, were a physical manifestation of my intent to leave, an undeniable fact in a house built on emotional fiction. I could feel my parents' eyes on them whenever they walked past my open door. They said nothing, but their silence screamed. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning, just 4 days before my flight. I woke up with a clear agenda: a final data sync with the ESO servers in Germany, an email to Dr. Ramirez confirming my travel itinerary, and a call to the international shipping company. I reached for my laptop on the bedside table where I had left it charging the night before. It wasn't there. My first thought was simple confusion. Had I moved it? Did I leave it downstairs? A quick, methodical search of my room yielded nothing. I went downstairs. It wasn't in the kitchen, not in the living room. A cold, sharp knot of dread began to tighten in my stomach. I asked my mother, who was arranging flowers in a vase with surgical precision. "Have you seen my laptop?" She didn't look at me, her focus entirely on clipping the stem of a white lily. "No, dear, I haven't touched it." I asked my father. He looked up from his newspaper, his expression a perfect, unreadable mask. "A laptop? No, can't help you." Their denials were too quick, too flat. I walked into Cora's room without knocking. She was sitting on her bed staring at the wall, the same vacant expression on her face. The room was still and quiet. "Where is it, Cora?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. She turned her head slowly, her eyes unfocused. "Where is what?" she whispered. The lie was so blatant, so poorly delivered, it was almost laughable. It was in that moment that the full, terrifying reality of my situation crashed down on me. This wasn't a passive-aggressive Cold War anymore. This was active sabotage. They had moved from emotional blackmail to physical obstruction. They had taken my work, my connection to the outside world, the literal key to my future, and hidden it. It was a desperate, childish, and terrifyingly effective act of aggression. The panic I had been holding at bay for 2 weeks finally broke through, a tidal wave of ice-cold fear. They weren't just asking me to stay, they were going to make me. Panic is a cold, clean thing. It's not the chaotic, screaming mess you see in movies. It's a quiet, methodical hyperfocus, a sudden narrowing of the universe to a single, desperate objective: find the laptop. My scientific mind, usually occupied with the vastness of space-time, was now consumed with the topography of my childhood home. I started in my room, then moved through the house with the cold precision of a law enforcement search team. I checked under sofa cushions, behind the television, in the linen closet, behind stacks of towels that smelled of my mother's fabric softener. Each empty space was a fresh jolt to my system, a small electric shock of failure. My search grew less methodical, more frantic. I was pulling books from shelves, opening dusty board game boxes, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. This was a violation, an act of domestic terrorism. And I had no doubt about the perpetrators. The search led me, inevitably, to my father's study. The one room in the house that had always been his sovereign territory, a place of bills and leather-bound books that no one ever read. The door was closed. I opened it without knocking, an act of rebellion that felt years overdue. The room was neat, orderly, the desk a picture of masculine control. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly. A laptop-sized space in a bookshelf? A lump under a throw blanket on the leather chair? I went straight for the desk. My hands, slick with a cold sweat, started pulling open drawers, pens, paper clips, old checkbook registers, Nothing. In the bottom right drawer, the deep one meant for files, my fingers brushed against a thick, worn manila folder with a single word written on the tab in my father's blocky handwriting: Cora. My hunt for the laptop was instantly forgotten. It was a secondary concern, a mere symptom of the disease I was just beginning to understand. I pulled the folder out and sat in my father's high-backed leather chair, the cool material a stark contrast to the heat rising in my face. It wasn't filled with her musical awards or glowing reviews. It was filled with receipts, invoices, canceled checks, all from doctors, but not from specialists. Just a series of bills from our old family practitioner, Dr. Evans, stretching back more than a decade. I looked at the first one. The date was from late May, 11 years ago. The reason for visit: acute anxiety and exhaustion. I remembered that May. It was the week of Cora's final exams in her senior year of high school. Exams she never took. My parents had told everyone she'd come down with a terrible case of mononucleosis. They'd gotten a doctor's note. They'd taken her to the beach for a week to recover. I kept digging. Another invoice. This one from when she was 21, just 3 days before her first major solo recital at a local concert hall. The diagnosis: severe migraine and fatigue. The recital had been canceled at the last minute due to her sudden illness. I remembered the drama, the phone calls, the refunded tickets. My parents had bought her a new dress and a diamond necklace to cheer her up. Another, and then another. A clear, undeniable pattern emerged from the bland medical paperwork. Every time Cora faced a significant, high-stakes performance, a moment where her talent would be truly tested, she would collapse. And every single time, my parents' solution was the same: retreat. They would get a vague diagnosis from a compliant family doctor, cancel the event, and then shower her with comfort and affection. They never took her to a therapist. They never sought a specialist. They never forced her to face the consequences. The cold clarity that washed over me was more terrifying than the initial panic. My parents hadn't been protecting a fragile genius. They had been cultivating one. They had built this prison of weakness around her, brick by brick, with every canceled performance, with every coddling excuse. Her fragility wasn't a condition. It was a carefully constructed career path they had managed for her. And now I understood why they had recoiled in horror at my suggestion of a real clinic. A team of professionals wouldn't just treat Cora. They would ask questions. They would dig into her history. They would uncover this pattern of enabling and call it what it was: a form of abuse. Their fear wasn't for Cora's career. It was for the exposure of their own catastrophic failure as parents. In that moment, sitting in my father's chair, the missing laptop felt like a triviality. The equation I'd been trying to solve for weeks was suddenly, horribly, illuminated. Staying here wouldn't save her. It would only ensure that the experiment continued, with me as the new, primary variable. The revelation in my father's study didn't bring despair. It brought a strange, cold calm. The emotional variables that had clouded my judgment for weeks, guilt, responsibility, love, pity, were gone. All that remained was a single, elegant equation. My family was a closed system, spiraling towards a predictable, destructive conclusion. The only way to alter the outcome was to introduce an external force, or to remove a key component. I was that component. My presence wasn't a solution. It was fuel for the fire. The arguments were over. The negotiations had failed. Logic had been treated as a weapon and compassion as a weakness. Now there was only strategy. I walked out of the study and went straight to my room, closing the door behind me. I sat on my bed, the chaos of my frantic search surrounding me, and took out my phone. My first call was not to my parents, not to a friend, but to a faceless voice in a call center thousands of miles away. It was the technical support line for my laptop's manufacturer. With a calm, steady voice I didn't recognize as my own, I reported my device stolen. I gave them the serial number, which I had stored, like all important data, in a secure file on my cloud server. I answered their security questions. And then, I gave the command. Yes, please. Initiate a remote lockdown and data wipe. There was a click, a few seconds of typing, and then the voice confirmed it. The command has been sent, ma'am. The next time that device connects to the internet, it will be permanently disabled. A brick. I felt a grim, satisfying finality in the word. They had taken a hostage. I had just executed it. My next step was to secure my assets. I left the house without a word, my car keys clutched in my fist. I drove to the university, the familiar route a comfort in its predictability. My campus office was exactly as I had left it, a small, quiet sanctuary of books and academic papers. And there, sitting in its docking station, was the answer. The external hard drive, the redundant backup. Every byte of my research, every email from the ESO, every piece of my professional life was sitting in that small black plastic rectangle. I ejected it, my movements quick and precise. I held it in my hand. It was heavier than it looked, weighted with the full mass of my future. I slipped it into my purse. The war for my data was over. I had won. On the way back, I stopped at a big box electronics store. The fluorescent lights and aisles of gleaming technology were a jarring contrast to the dim, emotional twilight of my parents' house. I bought a new laptop, a newer, more powerful model than the one that was now a ticking time bomb somewhere in my childhood home. I paid with my own credit card, the transaction a small, clean act of self-reliance. My final stop was at my friend Sarah's apartment. She was a fellow academic, a sociologist, and she understood the brutal politics of family systems better than anyone I knew. I explained the situation in clipped, analytical terms. She didn't offer sympathy or advice. She just listened, nodded, and then took the key to her apartment off her keychain. "Stay as long as you need," she said. "My guest room is your forward operating base." That evening, I began the extraction. One piece at a time. I started with my packed suitcases, carrying them down the stairs while my parents were watching television, the canned laughter from the sitcom a surreal soundtrack to my espionage. I loaded them into my car, my heart hammering against my ribs not with fear, but with a strange, exhilarating adrenaline. I was no longer a victim in this house. I was an operative, an agent of my own liberation. Over the next 2 days, I moved everything that mattered. My research books, my personal documents, the new laptop. Each trip was a calculated risk, a quiet act of defiance executed under the enemy's nose. I was a ghost in my own home, a strategist moving her pieces into position for the final, decisive maneuver. The proving ground had become a battlefield, and I was finally fighting back. The morning of my flight was a study in stillness. I woke before dawn at Sarah's apartment, the unfamiliar quiet of a home not steeped in tension, a gentle reintroduction to the world. There was no grand confrontation, no tearful, dramatic farewell. My covert operations of the past 2 days had rendered all of that obsolete. I had already left, piece by piece. This final act was a mere formality, the signing of a treaty whose terms had already been met. I dressed in the clothes I had set aside, my movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. I wrote a note, my hand steady, the words carefully chosen not to wound, but to cauterize. It was a surgical procedure, a necessary amputation. I drove to the house one last time. The sky was a pale pre-dawn gray, the streetlights casting long, lonely shadows. The house was dark, asleep. I slip my old key into the lock, the sound of the tumblers turning unnervingly loud in the morning silence. I walked into the kitchen, the familiar scent of coffee and old wood a sudden sharp pang in my chest. On the polished surface of the dining table, I placed 3 items. First, the brochure for the clinic in the Berkshires, its glossy pictures of serene landscapes and compassionate-looking therapists, a stark contrast to the gloom of the room. Second, a check. Not the full amount I had originally offered, but enough to cover the initial consultation and deposit. It wasn't a bribe. It was a final, practical gesture. It was help, stripped of all emotional baggage. Finally, I laid down the note. The words were simple, the culmination of weeks of agonizing calculus. "I love you both," it read. "But I have to choose myself too. Please, help Cora get the help she truly needs. The kind of help I can't give." It was an admission of my own limitations and, simultaneously, an indictment of theirs. It was the truest thing I had ever written to them. I looked at the 3 items lying there, a small, stark tableau of my final offer. Then, without a backward glance, I walked out the door, leaving the key on the table beside the note. I didn't lock it. The gesture felt important. I was no longer a prisoner, so there was no need for locks. I was simply walking away. The taxi was waiting at the end of the street just as I'd arranged. As we pulled away, I watched my childhood home shrink in the rearview mirror, a perfect suburban dollhouse holding a lifetime of secrets. My phone, which I had kept on airplane mode, remained dark in my hand. I knew what would happen when my parents woke up. I could already hear the frantic, unanswered calls, the cascade of furious and wounded text messages. I could picture the scene, the discovery of the note, the check, the empty bedroom with its neatly made bed, the dawning, horrified realization that their hostage had escaped. But their reactions were no longer my data to process. I was removing myself from the experiment. At the airport, the noise and anonymous bustle were a balm. I was just another traveler, a woman with a suitcase and a destination, my story invisible to the thousands of people rushing past. It was only when the plane finally pushed back from the gate, a low groan of machinery signaling the final, irrevocable departure, that my phone buzzed to life. The screen lit up with a barrage of notifications. 8 missed calls from Mom, 6 from Dad, a string of texts, each more frantic than the last. I looked at the screen for a long moment. Then I pressed the power button, holding it down until the screen went black. The plane accelerated down the runway, a bone-rattling roar of pure power. As we lifted into the air, banking steeply over the sprawling city, I looked down at the grid of lights below, a vast and complex galaxy receding into the darkness. A wave of grief washed over me, sharp and profound, for the family I had, and the one I wished I'd had. But it was followed, just as quickly, by a feeling so vast and intoxicating it left me breathless. The pure, terrifying, and absolutely beautiful lightness of escape. 1 year later. The air here is thin and sharp, so devoid of moisture that it feels like you're inhaling pure clarity. At an altitude of over 16,000 feet in the Atacama Desert, the world feels stripped down to its essential elements: rock, wind, and light. The sky above me is not the familiar hazy blue of Massachusetts, but a deep, violent violet that bleeds into an impossibly dark black. It's a sky so transparent that the Milky Way isn't a faint, milky smear. It's a raging, glittering river of light, a celestial torrent of dust and sun so close and vivid it feels as if I could reach out and run my fingers through it. Feel the grit of ancient starlight on my skin. This is my cathedral. This is my proving ground. My work has been fruitful. The data I've collected from the Very Large Telescope has led to a small but significant discovery. A new understanding of the metallicity gradients in satellite galaxies, a faint echo of the universe's earliest days. It's not a headline-grabbing breakthrough, but in the quiet, methodical world of astrophysics, it's a solid brick in the wall of human knowledge. I have a purpose here. My brain, once consumed with navigating the chaotic orbit of my family, is now free to roam the elegant, predictable pathways of the cosmos. The peace I've found is profound, a silence not of tension, but of awe. The letters from home are infrequent, but they come. My parents' correspondence is stiff, formal, still bruised by what they see as my ultimate betrayal. They inform me of neighborhood news and the state of their health in short, clipped sentences. The anger has cooled into a glacier of resentment, a vast, slow-moving mass that may take a generation to thaw. I accept this. I understand that the price of my freedom was their comfort, their carefully constructed reality. I don't know if they will ever truly forgive me, but I have learned to forgive myself. The letters from Cora are different. They began as hesitant, single-page notes, written in a shaky, unfamiliar hand. She told me, in the sparse clinical language of a new patient, that she had gone to the clinic. She told me about her therapy, about the terrifying, liberating process of dismantling the fragile construct of her identity. She did not return to the concert stage. The pressure, the weight of a lifetime of expectations, was a burden she finally gave herself permission to set down. The discovery she made was not in a distant galaxy, but in the quiet spaces between the notes. She started teaching piano lessons for young children in a small local music school. She found a joy in their clumsy, enthusiastic explorations of the keyboard that she had never found in the pursuit of her own perfection. Then, she began to compose. Not grand, dramatic sonatas, but small, intricate pieces, like fragments of captured light. She was no longer a performer, an instrument for the genius of long-dead men. She was a creator. She was finding her own voice, a voice that had been silenced for years under the weight of the name Prodigy. The last letter arrived a week ago, a thick envelope with Chilean postage. Inside, there was no letter, only a few sheets of meticulously copied sheet music. The handwriting was confident now, the notes clean and precise on the staff. It was a short, lyrical piano piece, its melody both melancholic and hopeful, a complex harmony of sorrow and release. I don't play, but I could read the language. I could see the shape of the music, its gentle rise and fall, its quiet resolution. At the top of the first page, scrawled in a flowing, artistic script, was the title. It wasn't in Italian or German, the traditional languages of classical music. It was in plain, simple English. It read, "For my sister, who showed me the other stars."